True wealth is not measured by the abundance of possessions, but by the resilience of the spirit. When every external asset is liquidated by the sudden storms of fate, in the high-stakes economy of the soul, the most valuable currency is not gold or silver, but a faith that remains solvent even when the heavens are silent and the earthly accounts are empty. Job was the ultimate spiritual billionaire of his time, a man whose portfolio of integrity was as vast as his material riches. He was blameless and upright, a man who hedged his life with prayer and invested his heart in the wisdom of the Creator. Yet, in a single day of unthinkable volatility, his entire world faced a total market collapse. His children were gone. His wealth vanished like smoke, and his health was stripped away until he sat in the ashes of his former life, scraping his wounds with broken pottery. This is not just an ancient story of loss. It is a master class in the philosophy of suffering and the hidden dividends of divine mystery. It challenges the very idea that righteousness guarantees a profit and asks if we can still worship when the rewards are withdrawn. What happens when the silence of the heavens becomes your inheritance, and the logic of the world offers no return on your investment of faith? Welcome to Jesus Stories. In the realm of human thought, we often view life through the lens of a simple transaction. We believe that if we work hard, if we are honest, and if we follow the rules, the universe owes us a favorable return. This is the theology of the ledger, where we expect our moral deposits to prevent any physical or financial withdrawals. But the story of Job shatters this illusion of control. It introduces us to a man who did everything right, yet his life became a series of catastrophic losses. This is the appearance of a deeper thought, a reality where divine wisdom operates on a scale that human logic cannot comprehend. Job was not being punished for a bad investment of his character. He was being refined in a crucible that separates the gold of true devotion from the dross of self-interested religion. When we look at the opening of this narrative, we see a cosmic debate about the nature of motivation. The adversary, the great accuser, raises a question that haunts every financial and spiritual system. Does Job fear God for nothing? This is a question about the purity of the heart. It suggests that Job only loves the Creator because the Creator has blessed him with a massive hedge of protection and prosperity. It is a challenge to the idea of unconditional loyalty. If the blessings are the only reason for the belief, then the belief is merely a business deal. But God, the sovereign architect of all value, allowed the testing of Job to prove that there is a wealth of the Spirit that cannot be bought or sold. The sudden liquidation of Job's life was not an accident of history. It was a revelation of what remains when the scaffolding of comfort is removed. Job lost his livestock, his servants, and his 10 children in a succession of blows that would break any ordinary man. His response, however, was a profound act of spiritual solvency. He fell to the ground and worshipped, acknowledging that he came into the world with nothing and would leave with nothing. He recognized that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. In this moment, Job demonstrated a philosophy of ownership that few ever master. He understood that he was not the owner of his life or his riches, but merely a steward. When the assets were recalled by the true owner, he did not curse the loss. He honored the source. As we dive deeper into the silence that followed, we find the most difficult season of any trial. It is the period of waiting where no news is heard and no relief is felt. Job sat in the dust for 7 days and 7 nights, while his 3 friends sat with him. In silence, this period represents the void that often follows a great crisis. In the world of finance, it is the stagnant market after a crash. In the world of the soul, it is the dark night where God seems impossibly far away. Job cried out to the heavens, demanding an audit of his life. He wanted to know why his righteous living had resulted in such a miserable deficit. He was wrestling with the silence, not because he lacked faith, but because his faith was demanding an encounter with the truth. His friends, representing the conventional wisdom of their day, tried to force Job's suffering into a tidy box of cause and effect. They argued that if Job was suffering, he must have committed some secret sin or made a moral error. They were like cold accountants looking at a bankrupt business and assuming the owner must have been a thief. Their logic was simple and cruel. They believed in a God who only rewards and never tests, but Job refused to accept their shallow explanations. He maintained his integrity even while he questioned the justice of his situation. He knew that his suffering was a mystery, not a math problem. He was looking for a revelation, not a rationalization. This tension between human explanation and divine mystery is where true wisdom is forged. We often want a reason for our pain because reasons give us a sense of control. If we can find a reason, we think we can prevent it from happening again. But God does not always give us reasons. He gives us his presence. When the Creator finally spoke to Job out of the whirlwind, he did not explain the bet with the adversary. He did not apologize for the loss. Instead, he expanded Job's vision to the vastness of the cosmos. He asked Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid. He spoke of the stars, the oceans, and the wild creatures that no human eye sees. This divine response was a shift in perspective from the micro to the macro. God was showing Job that the world is governed by a wisdom that is far wider than human sight, and a love that is deeper than human measure. He was reminding Job that the one who manages the complex ecosystems of the universe is more than the life of one man. The whirlwind was not a rebuke of Job's questions, but an invitation to trust the character of the one who holds all things together. It was a call to move from the hearing of the ear to the seeing of the eye. It was an invitation to find peace in the sovereignty of the Creator rather than the certainty of circumstances. In the end, Job's transformation was more valuable than any of the riches he had lost. He came to see that his relationship with God was the only asset that could never be liquidated. His eyes were open to a reality where suffering is not an exit from God's grace, but a doorway into his glory. He learned that the silence of heaven is not the absence of God, but a sacred space where the heart is stretched to hold more of his presence. Job became a man who could pray for his friends even when they had judged him. He became a man who could receive restoration without being enslaved by it. His life was rebuilt on a foundation that was no longer dependent on the stability of the world. When we consider the restoration of Job, we see that he received twice as much as he had before. This was not just a reward for his patience, but a symbol of the compound interest of the Spirit. When we walk through the fire with God, we do not just survive, we are multiplied. We gain a depth of character, a weight of wisdom, and a capacity for compassion that the comfortable can never know. Job's new wealth was seasoned with the memory of the ashes. He knew the value of his life because he had seen the price of his faith. He died old and full of days, a testimony to the fact that God is worthy of our trust, even when life is not fair. This journey, from the peak of prosperity to the depth of despair and back to the height of restoration, is the ultimate map for the human soul. It teaches us that our true net worth is found in our connection to the eternal. It reminds us that every season of loss is a preparation for a season of greater revelation. As we move forward, we must look closer at the mechanics of this testing and how the adversary uses the tools of the world to try and bankrupt our belief. We must explore the shadows, where the most difficult questions are asked, and see how the light of truth begins to pierce through the darkest clouds of our confusion. To understand the full scope of this spiritual economy, we must now examine the hidden forces that work against our peace, and the subtle ways our own logic can become a trap when we face the unthinkable. If we peer into the shadows of Job's story, we find a reality that most people are too afraid to face. We often view suffering as a glitch in the system, a bug in the code of a successful life. But what if the crash is actually the core of the curriculum? In the world of wealth and capital, we are taught that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We believe that if we work hard, we get rich. We believe that if we follow the rules, the market will reward us. But Job's life is the ultimate disruption of this linear logic. He was the wealthiest man in the East, a titan of industry with a diversified portfolio of livestock, land, and human capital. He was a man who practiced perfect spiritual risk management. And yet, in a single fiscal cycle, his entire net worth was wiped out. His children, his legacy, his physical health, all of it turned into liabilities overnight. This is where we must ask the dangerous questions. If a righteous man can lose everything, then the contract we think we have with the universe is a lie. We think we are in a transaction with God. We think that our prayers are currency and our good deeds are investments that guarantee a return. But the adversary, the auditor of heaven, raised the most terrifying financial question in history. Does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, is Job's fate just a business deal? Is his devotion merely a cost of doing business to keep the blessings flowing? If you remove the profit, does the partnership dissolve? This is the dialectic of the shadow. It forces us to look at the bankruptcy of our own motives. Most people do not want God. They want the things God can give them. They do not want wisdom. They want the wealth that wisdom promises. But true wealth is what is left when all your assets are stripped away, when the market crashes and the bank accounts are frozen. Who are you? Job sat in the ashes, scraping his skin with broken pottery, a man whose credit score with the world had hit zero. His friends arrived, and they represent the conventional wisdom of the boardroom. They represent the consultants who believe that every failure is the result of a bad decision. They told Job that he must have hidden debt. They insisted that he must have committed some ethical violation to deserve this drawdown. They could not accept a world where suffering is not a punishment, because if suffering can happen to an innocent man, then their own wealth is not a sign of their goodness. If Job is innocent, then their own success is just a matter of timing and grace, not their own brilliance. This is the great illusion of the self-made man. We love to take credit for the bull market, but we blame the devil for the bear market. Job's friends were terrified of the mystery, because mystery cannot be managed. Mystery cannot be put into a spreadsheet. They wanted to audit Job's soul, to find the missing decimal point that caused the catastrophe. But Job refused to give them a false confession. He understood that his integrity was the only asset he had left that could not be liquidated. In the depths of the silence, Job realized that God is not a cosmic vending machine. He realized that the value of the relationship is found in the struggle, not the payout. In the modern world, we see this same pattern in the pursuit of the American dream. We are told that if we buy the right stocks and follow the right influencers, we will reach a state of permanent security. But security is a myth. The only thing that is permanent is the character you build through the loss. Think about the Great Depressions of history, or the sudden collapses of empires. The people who survived were not those who had the most gold, but those who had the most internal resilience. Job was being forced to move from a faith of hearing to a faith of seeing. He was moving from a theoretical wealth to a foundational wealth. The silence of heaven during his agony was not a sign of God's absence. It was the silence of a master teacher. Watching a student take the final exam, if God had explained the reasons for the suffering, Job would have been satisfied with an answer. But God wanted to give Job an encounter. An answer satisfies the mind, but an encounter transforms the spirit. We often pray for the storm to stop, but the storm is the only thing that can wash away the superficial layers of our ego. We want the crown without the cross, and we want the dividends without the risk. But in the economy of the kingdom, the way up is down. The way to gain is to lose. The way to be filled is to be emptied. Job had to become a zero so that he could understand the value of the infinite. If you are going through a season where your prayers feel like they are bouncing off a brass ceiling, do not assume you are being punished. You might be being audited for a promotion. You might be being tested to see if you can handle the true riches that are coming. Because if you cannot trust God in the dark, you will never truly honor him in the light. You will only be a fair-weather fan of the divine. The friends of Job represent the danger of a theology that is too tidy. They represent the danger of a life that has never known a true crisis. They spoke about God from a place of comfort, while Job spoke to God from a place of pain. There is a profound difference between knowing about the market and being in the market. There is a difference between studying the theory of wealth and losing your life savings in a day. The pain gave Job an authority that his prosperity never could. It gave him a voice that has echoed for thousands of years. No one remembers the names of the other wealthy men of Job's time. We only remember the man who sat in the ashes and refused to curse the source of his life. This is the paradox of legacy. Your greatest contribution to the world will likely come from your greatest wound. Your most valuable insights will come from the moments when you had no answers. In the United States today, we are obsessed with the optics of success. We post our highlights on social media and hide our scars. But the story of Job tells us that the scars are the most sacred part of the story. They are the proof that we stayed in the arena. They are the proof that our faith was not for sale. If you can look at the wreckage of your plans and still say, "Blessed be the name of the Lord," you have achieved a level of wealth that no inflation can touch. You have found a currency that is backed by the gold of heaven. This is the hidden wisdom of the ashes. It is the realization that we brought nothing into this world, and we will take nothing out, everything in. Between is alone. Our children are alone, our health is alone, our capital is alone. When we realize that we are stewards and not owners, the fear of loss begins to lose its power over us. We can hold things with an open hand. We can invest without the desperation of needing to win. We can suffer without the bitterness of feeling cheated, because we know that the one who gave the loan is also the one who sustains the life. The silence of God is the ultimate test of our stewardship. Will we still manage the small things when the master is away? Will we still be faithful to the vision when the results are invisible? Job's story is a warning to every person who thinks they have figured out the formula for a blessed life. There is no formula. There is only a person. There is only the sovereign will of a creator who sees the end from the beginning. He is not playing a game of chess with your life. He is writing a masterpiece, and sometimes the most beautiful. Movements of the symphony are the ones written in a minor key. They are the moments of tension and unresolved chords. They are the moments that make the final resolution so powerful. If your life is in a minor key right now, do not try to rush to the end of the song. Listen to the notes. Feel the weight of the silence. There is a wisdom in the dark that the light can never teach you. There is a strength in the struggle that the ease can never give you. Job was being prepared for a double portion, but he had to first be prepared for the void. He had to learn that God is enough, even if God is all you have. This is the ultimate financial freedom. It is the freedom from the need for more. It is the freedom from the fear of less. When you reach that point, you are truly dangerous to the kingdom of darkness, because you cannot be bought and you cannot be intimidated. You have moved beyond the transaction and into the transformation. You are no longer a consumer. You are no longer a consumer of grace. You are a vessel of glory. and that glory is refined in the furnace of affliction. The furnace does not consume the gold. It only consumes the dross. It consumes the pride, the self-sufficiency, and the shallow expectations it leaves behind a substance that is pure and unyielding. Job's transformation was not just for his own sake. It was for the sake of every person who would ever read his words. It was for the sake of his friends who needed to see a faith that could not be broken. It was for the sake of the heavens, to prove that a human being can love God for who he is, not just for what he does. This is the high calling of the sufferer. You are a witness to the universe. You are a living testimony that there is something more valuable than comfort. There is something more precious than profit. There is a divine wisdom that governs the stars and the cells of your body, and that wisdom is working all things together for a good that you cannot yet see. So do not despise the whirlwind, do not fear the silence, and do not listen to the voices of those who want to simplify your mystery. Stay in the ashes if you must, but keep your eyes on the horizon, because the dawn is because the dawn is coming, and it will bring with it a light that makes sense of every shadow. The perspective we gain in the valley is the only thing that allows us to handle the height of the mountain. If Job had never lost his first fortune, he would have died a successful man, but because he lost it all and found God, he became an eternal man. His story did not end in the ashes, and neither will yours. The restoration is not just about getting back what you lost. It is about becoming who you were always meant to be. It is about the expansion of your capacity to hold the glory of God. And as we move from the darkness of the test toward the light of the revelation, we begin to see that every loss was actually an opening for something greater. The laws of the universe operate with a precision that often escapes the impatient eye. When we look at the life of Job, we are not just looking at a man in a heap of ashes. We are looking at the fundamental law of equity and resilience in the financial centers of New York or the tech hubs of Silicon Valley. Men often mistake a temporary bull market for their own genius. But the story of Job reminds us that the true measure of a man's net worth is what is left when the market crashes to zero. Job was a man of immense spiritual and material capital. His integrity was his primary asset. In the language of the modern economy, we call this intrinsic value. Intrinsic value. Intrinsic value. It is not determined by the ticker symbol or the daily fluctuations of the stock exchange. It is the core strength that remains when the dividends stop and the creditors knock at the door. Job was blameless and upright. This was his moat. This was his protection against the ultimate bankruptcy of the soul. The testing of Job in the heavenly realm was a stress test of the highest order. Just as a central bank might simulate a total collapse to see which institutions stand, the Creator allowed the hedge of protection to be lifted. Satan questioned the motive behind Job's success. He argued that Job's faith was merely a transaction. He suggested that Job was only loyal because the returns were high. This is the philosophy of the mercenary. It is mindset of those who only invest when the chart is green. But true wealth, the kind that lasts for generations, is built on a foundation that does not crumble when the portfolio turns red. Job lost his livestock, his servants, and his children. In a single day, this was a total liquidation of his physical holdings. Yet the narrative tells us that in all this, Job did not sin. He understood a principle that many modern investors forget. He understood that he was a steward, not an owner. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. This is the ultimate philosophy of risk management. It is the recognition that everything we hold in this material world, it is on loan. When you realize that you own nothing, you can never truly lose everything. The silence of heaven that followed was not a sign of divine negligence. In the world of finance, we call this the accumulation phase. It is the quiet period, where no visible growth is occurring. It is the long winter where the seeds are deep underground. The world looks at the silence and sees failure. The world looks at the ashes and sees a man who has lost his edge. But the silence is where the character is refined. It is where the ego is burned away to make room for a much larger vision. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, represented the conventional wisdom of the day. They believed in a simple, linear cause and effect. They believed that if you are suffering, you must have made a bad investment. They believe that pain is always a punishment for a specific error. This is the same logic used by those who mock the visionary during a market correction. They see the temporary drop in price and assume the value is gone. They demand a confession of failure. They want Job to admit that his strategy was flawed, but Job held his ground. He knew that his integrity was intact. He knew that the mystery of his suffering was deeper than a simple balance sheet. This is the dialectic of truth. Sometimes the righteous suffer not because they did something wrong, but because they are being prepared for a higher level of authority in the United States. We see this in the stories of great entrepreneurs who went through multiple bankruptcies before building empires. The failure was not the end. The failure was the tuition for the wisdom they would later use to manage billions. Job was paying a heavy tuition. He was learning that God is not a vending machine where you insert good deeds and receive coins, prosperity. He was learning that the relationship is the reward. When the whirlwind finally appeared, God did not give Job a line item audit of his life. God did not explain the bet with Satan. Instead, God expanded Job's perspective. He spoke of the foundations of the earth and the measurements of the sea. He spoke of the constellations and the laws of nature. God was showing Job the macroeconomics of the universe. He was showing him that the system is far too complex for a human mind to calculate. There are variables that we cannot see. There are forces at play that operate on a scale of thousands of years. When we try to judge God's justice based on our 60-minute window of pain, we are like a day trader trying to predict a century of economic history based on a 1-minute candle. It is impossible. True wisdom is the humility to admit that we do not have all the data. Job's response was one of total surrender. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. This is the moment of realization. This is the point where the investor stops looking at the screen and starts looking at the founder. Job moved from a religion of hearsay to a relationship of vision. He realized that his suffering was the very thing that cleared his vision. The ashes had acted as a salve for his eyes. Without the loss, he would have remained a wealthy man who knew about God. Through the loss, he became a broken man who knew God. This is the greatest trade in the history of the world. He traded his temporary comfort for an eternal perspective. He traded his pride for an unshakable peace. And then the law of restoration began to work. The text says that God restored Job's fortunes when he prayed for his friends. This is a critical detail. The restoration did not come when Job argued his case. It did not come when he demanded his rights. It came when he practiced the ultimate form of spiritual generosity. He prayed for the very people who had insulted him. He released the debt of their offense. In doing so, he cleared the way for his own abundance. Wealth is a flow, and bitterness is a dam. Job removed the dam of resentment. He allowed the grace of God to flow through him to others. And as it flowed through him, it filled his own. life to overflowing, he received twice as much as he had before. This is not just a fairy tale ending. This is the law of compounding interest applied to the soul when you stay in the market through the crash and you keep your integrity. The recovery is often exponential. The new life of Job was not a replacement for the old one. It was a transformation. He had a new depth of compassion. He had a new authority in his words. He became a beacon of hope for every person who would ever sit in the ashes. In the modern world, we are often told that we must avoid pain at all costs. We are told that success is a straight line upward. But the story of Job teaches us that the path to true wealth often goes through the valley of the shadow of death. The most valuable assets are those that have been tested by fire. The most trusted leaders are those who have lost everything and remained standing. The United Canada and Australia, nations built on these biblical foundations, have seen that the strength of a society is found in its resilience. It is found in the ability to hold on to a vision even when the heavens are silent. We must look at our own seasons of loss with the eyes of Job. We must ask what is being refined. We must ask what new perspective is being offered. The whirlwind is not there to destroy you. The whirlwind is there to wake you up. It is there to show you that you are part of a story that is much bigger than your current bank balance. You are part of a divine economy that values character over currency. You are being prepared for a restoration that will make your previous success look like a shadow. This is the logic of the shadow. This is the logic of the light. This is the certainty of the harvest. If you do not grow weary in doing good, you will reap if you do not give up. Job did not give up. He wrestled, he cried, and he questioned, but he did not let go, and because he held on, he became the heir of a double portion. He became the gold that was refined in the furnace. As we look at the mechanics of this restoration, we begin to see how these eternal principles can be applied to the way we navigate our own daily challenges and the practical steps we must take to align ourselves with this higher wisdom. The transition from the whirlwind to the reality of the dust is where the true work of wisdom begins. We often view the story of Job as a distant theological drama, but in truth, it is the ultimate blueprint for navigating the volatile markets of human existence. In the modern world, we are obsessed with the accumulation of assets, the growth of portfolios, and the security of our balance sheets. We build towers of digital gold and stone, believing that our righteousness or our hard work creates an invisible shield against the chaos of the world. But Job reminds us that the economy of heaven operates on a different frequency than the economy of man. Job was a man of immense wealth, a titan of industry in his era, possessing thousands of livestock and a vast household. He was the epitome of a successful investor who had diversified his life into family, faith, and finance. Yet, in a single fiscal quarter of the soul, his entire net worth was liquidated. This was not a market correction. It was a total system failure. When we look at our own lives, we often mistake price for value. The price of Job's life had dropped to zero in the eyes of the world. He sat in ashes, scraping his skin with broken pottery. A man bankrupt of health and capital, however, the value of his soul remained untouched because it was anchored in a reality that the market could not reach. In the philosophy of wealth, we must distinguish between what we own and who we are. Most people spend their lives building a persona based on their possessions. When the storm comes and the possessions vanish, the persona collapses because there is no foundation beneath it. Job's foundation was his integrity, a form of human capital that no thief can steal and no inflation can devalue. As a philosopher of 50 years, I have seen many empires rise and fall in the streets of New York and the halls of power. I have seen men lose everything and end their lives because they believed they were their bank accounts. They lacked the Jobian perspective, which understands that we Our temporary stewards of eternal resources, the first step in applying this hidden wisdom to your daily life is to conduct a spiritual audit. Ask yourself, if the whirlwind took your house, your car, and your career tomorrow, what would be left? If the answer is nothing, then you are living on credit, not on character. True wealth is what is left when all your money is gone. Jobs' friends represented the mainstream financial analysts of their time. They looked at the data of his suffering and concluded that there must be a hidden debt of sin. They believed in a linear, transactional universe where a plus B always equals C. If you are suffering, you must have made a bad trade. If you are poor, you must be lazy or cursed. This is the trap of meritocracy that blinds us to the mystery of divine timing. The world tells you that you are the sole master of your fate, but the whirlwind tells you that you are a participant in a vast, complex dance. In the world of finance, we call this the black swan event, the unpredictable occurrence that defies all models. Job was living through a black swan of biblical proportions. His friends tried to fit his tragedy into a spreadsheet, but God's wisdom cannot be contained in a cell or a column. When you face a season of loss, do not listen to the voices that demand a simple explanation. The market of life does not always reward the good in the short term. There are cycles of winter that have nothing to do with your performance and everything to do with the season. Learning to sit in the silence of a down market without selling your soul is the highest form of discipline. We must understand the concept of the long game. Job's restoration did not happen overnight. It required him to endure the silence and the accusations while maintaining his position of faith. In the modern world, we are addicted to instant gratification and quarterly results. We want the blessing without the burial, but the most profound growth happens in the dark, under the pressure of the soil. Consider the mountain goat that God mentioned to Job. It lives on the edge of cliffs, navigating impossible terrain, where one wrong step means death. God feeds it and watches over its young, far from the eyes of men. This is a lesson in sovereign provision. If the Creator manages the complex ecosystems of the wilderness without our help, why do we think our frantic worrying can manage the complexities of our future? We must learn to trade our anxiety for awe. Anxiety is the belief that we are in control and failing. Awe is the realization that God is in control and succeeding. This shift in perspective is the ultimate hedge against the volatility of the world. When you look at the news, the inflation rates, and the political unrest, do not see them as signs of God's absence. See them as the movements of a world that is too big for your understanding, but not too big for his hand. The wise man does not seek to predict the storm. He seeks to build a house that can withstand it. Job's house was built on the rock of a relationship that transcended his circumstances. He understood that his life was not a series of accidents, but a narrative written by a master author. In your daily life, this means practicing a form of radical detachment. Enjoy the blessings, use the wealth to help others, and cherish your family. But do not let your heart become entangled in the things that can burn. Keep your soul light and your faith heavy. When you walk into your workplace or manage your business, do it with the humility of a man who has seen the whirlwind. Treat people with the compassion that Job's friends lacked. Understand that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Your success is not a sign of your superiority, and their struggle is not a sign of their failure. We are all investors in the same human experiment, trying to find meaning in the midst of mystery. The true currency of the kingdom of God is love, and the interest it pays is peace. If you want to be truly rich, invest in things that the world cannot price. Invest in your character, your relationships, and your connection to the divine. These are the only assets that will survive the final liquidation. Job's story is a reminder that the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing for you if it leads you to see God. The loss of his property led to the gain of a perspective that made him unshakable. He became a man who could not be bought by the devil or broken by the world. That is the definition of true power. As we move through the complexities of this modern age, we must carry the wisdom of the ashes with us. We must be people who can stand in the middle of a collapsing economy and say, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be his name." This is not a cry of defeat. It is a declaration of independence from the tyranny of circumstances. It is the ultimate contrarian move. While everyone else is panicking, the man of faith is praying. While the world is hoarding, the man of wisdom is giving. While the culture is screaming, the soul that has heard the whirlwind is silent and steady. This is how you turn a season of suffering into a legacy of strength. You stop trying to manage the wind and start trusting the one who walks upon it. The path to restoration begins with the surrender of the need to know why. It ends with the realization that who is more important, why, when. You finally stop demanding an explanation for your bank account or your health. You open the door for a revelation of his presence, and in that presence, you find a wealth that makes the gold of this world look like dross. You find the peace that surpasses all understanding, the kind that can only be forged in the fire. So, as you navigate your own markets today, remember that you are not a victim of chance. You are a student of the Almighty, and the lesson is always love. The world may see a man in the ashes, but God sees a king in the making. The process is painful, but the product is eternal. Hold on to your integrity as if it were your only lifeline, because in the end it is doubled, not as a reward for his suffering, but as a natural overflow of his transformed heart. When you change on the inside, your world eventually reflects that change on the outside. But even if it doesn't, you have already won, because you have found the pearl of great price. You have found the God who speaks in the storm and provides in the silence. This realization is the bridge that leads us from the struggle of the soul to the final awakening of the spirit. It is the moment where we stop looking at our scars as wounds and start seeing them as the maps to our redemption. As we prepare to see how this story concludes in the grand architecture of life, we must first learn to walk through the remaining shadows with our eyes fixed on the light that no darkness can overcome. The ultimate convergence of the human experience and the divine mystery is found in the moment when we stop asking why and start seeing who. Job did not find his way out of the ashes by solving a mathematical equation of morality or by balancing a ledger of his own good deeds. He found his way out when he realized that the architecture of the universe is built on a wisdom that far exceeds the narrow corridors of human logic. In the world of finance and the pursuit of true wealth, we often fall into the same trap as Job's friends. We believe that if we follow a specific formula, if we check every box, and if we avoid every visible risk, we are guaranteed a linear path to prosperity. But the story of Job is a profound warning against the illusion of control. It is a revelation that the market of life is volatile and that the most righteous investors can still face a total liquidation of their assets. True wealth is not merely the accumulation of things that can be stolen, burned, or lost in a storm. True wealth is the refined capacity of the soul to remain unshaken when the external world collapses. Job lost his children, his health, and his entire net worth in a single day. In modern terms, his portfolio went to zero. and his credit was destroyed. Yet, the reason Job is remembered thousands of years later is not because of what he lost, but because of what he refused to sell. He refused to sell his integrity for the sake of a quick explanation. He refused to liquidate his faith, even when the heavens were in a bear market of silence. This is the hidden wisdom of the ashes. When you are stripped of everything, you finally discover what is truly yours. If your happiness is tied to your bank account, you are a slave to the fluctuations of the economy. If your peace is tied to your reputation, you are a prisoner of public opinion. But if your foundation is built on the wisdom of the Creator, you possess an asset that no whirlwind can touch. Job was being prepared for a double portion, but that double portion could only be entrusted to a man who had been hollowed out by suffering. You cannot fill a cup that is already full of its own pride. God used the silence and the pain to expand Job's capacity to receive in the same way. The seasons of lack and confusion in your life are often the very periods where your spiritual and emotional capital is being compounded. The world sees a man in the ashes and calls him a failure. God sees a man in the ashes and sees a soul being tempered like gold in a furnace. The transformation of Job is the ultimate goal of the human journey. He moved from a theoretical understanding of God to an experiential encounter. He said, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes sees you in the language of wealth." This is the difference between reading a book about success and actually owning the means of production. Job moved from being a consumer of religious tradition to becoming a producer of divine testimony. His restoration was not a reward for his patience. It was a natural consequence of his alignment with the truth. When you align yourself with the wisdom of the whirlwind, the restoration of your life becomes inevitable. But notice that Job was not restored until he prayed for the friends who had judged him. This is a critical lesson in the philosophy of abundance. Bitterness is a liability that eats away at your future. Forgiveness is an investment that clears the path for new growth. Job had every right to remain angry at the men who had accused him of secret sins. He had every right to hold a grudge against the heavens for the unfairness of his pain. But Job understood that you cannot move into a new season of prosperity while carrying the baggage of the old season of resentment. By praying for his friends, Job demonstrated that he was no longer a victim of his circumstances. He was a master of his spirit, and the moment he released his grievances, floodgates of heaven opened. The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. This is not a promise that everyone who suffers will become a millionaire. It is a promise that everyone who trusts God through the suffering will receive a wealth of spirit that makes their previous life look like poverty. The new children Job had, the new livestock, and the new years of peace were all beautiful, but they were secondary to the new heart he possessed. He now walked with the quiet confidence of a man who had looked into the eye of the storm and found God staring back. He knew that the lightning has a path and the rain has a father. He knew that even when the economy of his life seemed chaotic, there's a steady hand at the helm. This is the peace that surpasses understanding. It is the ultimate hedge against the uncertainties of the future. As we look at the world today, we see many people sitting in their own version of the ashes. We see families broken by financial stress, individuals lost in the silence of unanswered prayers, and a culture that tries to explain away mystery with shallow slogans. But the story of Job offers us a different path. It invites us to embrace the complexity of our existence. It encourages us to stop demanding that God fit into our small boxes of fairness and to start trusting His vast wisdom. Your suffering is not a sign that you are forgotten. It is a sign that you are being prepared for a revelation that the comfortable will never know. The shadows in your life are only there because there is a light shining somewhere nearby. The silence you hear is not empty space. It is the breath of God waiting for the right moment to speak. Do not be afraid of the whirlwind. Do not be afraid of the ashes. The same God who laid the foundations of the earth is the same God who is building something eternal in you. Your story does not end in the loss. It does not end in the pain. It ends in restoration, in sight, and in a peace that can never be taken away. The wisdom of Job explains everything because it teaches us that we do not need to know the reasons as long as we know the one who holds the reasons. Real wealth is the ability to say, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." Whether the barns are full or the fields are empty, real success is the transformation of the soul from a seeker of blessings to a seeker of the blesser. Tonight, as you lay down your head, let go of the need to solve the mystery. Rest in the arms of the one who governs the stars and counts the hairs on your head. The morning is coming, and with it, a restoration that will far outweigh the weight of your current sorrow. You are not a victim of chance. You are a child of the King, and your redemption is already being written in the stars. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the heart of Job. If this message has touched your soul and given you a new perspective on your own season of struggle, we invite you to become a part of our community. At Jesus Stories, we believe that the ancient wisdom of the scriptures is the ultimate guide for navigating the complexities of modern life, finance, and faith. Please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a moment of these deep philosophical reflections. When you subscribe, you are not just following a channel, you are joining a movement of people who are seeking truth beyond the surface and wealth beyond the dollar. Share this video with someone who is currently sitting in the ashes and needs to know that the whirlwind is not the end. Leave a comment below and tell us how God has met you in your own silence, or how your perspective on suffering has changed. We read every word and we pray for this community every day. Remember, the silence of heaven is not the absence of God. It is the sacred space where your faith matures. Stay strong, stay faithful, and keep looking for the light in the middle of the storm. We will see you in the next story. May the peace of the Lord, which surpasses all understanding, guard your hearts and your minds. God bless you and keep you always.